Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're stepping into the shoes of a young revolutionary, Vinayak Savarkar, through his autobiography, English Inside the Enemy Camp. You'll be right there with him as he travels to England in the early 1900s, fueled by this burning desire for India's independence. The title alone, English Inside the Enemy Camp, speaks volumes about his mindset. He's not just going for tea and crumpets, is he?
Not at all. It's a declaration, a statement of purpose. Savarkar saw himself entering the lion's den not to be subdued, but to understand his enemy, undermine their power, and ultimately liberate his homeland.
Right, and the story begins with Savarkar on a ship bound for England. This isn't just a journey across the ocean, it's the start of a mission. We see him right off the bat inspiring a fellow passenger, a Sikh named Harnam Singh, to stand up to some Europeans who were mocking his turban.
Yeah.
It's a small act of defiance, but what I find fascinating is how it reveals Savarkar's understanding of something so fundamental, self-respect.
Exactly. Savarkar knew that challenging colonial rule had to begin with challenging the colonized mindset. He'd witnessed firsthand how British rule had instilled a sense of inferiority among some Indians. He believed that true liberation required reclaiming one's cultural identity and rejecting any notion of being lesser than.
And then we meet this mysterious Mr. Etiquette. Initially, this character seems to represent everything Savarkar opposes, advocating for Indians to adopt English customs. But then there's a twist.
Right. Mr. Etiquette becomes a silent but dedicated member of Savarkar's secret society, Abhinav Bharat. This detail reveals Savarkar's pragmatism and strategic thinking. He understood that building a movement required building alliances, even with those who might not initially share his radical views.
So Savarkar arrives in London, this buzzing center of Indian political activity, only to find himself caught in a web of differing opinions. He encounters organizations advocating for incremental change within the British Empire, while others are pushing for more drastic measures. He seems particularly disillusioned by the loyalty to the British Crown attitude he encounters among certain Indian leaders. Why did this bother him so much?
Savarkar saw this loyalty as a form of Stockholm Syndrome, a psychological consequence of prolonged colonial rule. He believed that appealing to British goodwill was a fool's errand, as the very foundation of the British Empire rested upon exploitation.
He gravitates toward Shyamji Krishnavarma's Indian Home Rule Society, which, while not advocating for complete independence, still represented a more radical approach than the Congress Party's stance at the time.
Yeah.
How did Savarkar's vision for India's future differ from those like Dadabhai Naoroji, who believed in working within the system?
That's a key distinction. Naoroji and the moderates believed in gradual reform, appealing to British fairness, and ultimately achieving self-governance within the framework of the empire. Savarkar, however, saw this as utterly insufficient. He believed that true liberation demanded complete independence, a clean break from British rule.
And this is where Savarkar's commitment to armed revolution really comes into play, right? He saw no path to true freedom without active resistance, and he was willing to use force to achieve it.
Absolutely. Savarkar was convinced that the British would never relinquish their hold on India willingly. He believed that only a powerful, unified, and armed uprising could dismantle the empire and pave the way for a truly independent India.
But Savarkar wasn't just about guns and bombs. He understood that revolutions weren't solely won on battlefields. They needed a foundation of powerful ideas, and that's where his writing comes in.
Exactly. Savarkar was a prolific writer and a master of using the written word as a weapon. He knew that to ignite a revolution, he had to first ignite people's minds.
He starts translating the works of the Italian revolutionary Giuseppe Mazzini and publishing The Indian Sociologist, a journal advocating for Indian self-rule. What was it about Mazzini that resonated so deeply with Savarkar?
Mazzini was a master of revolutionary theory and strategy. He argued for the unification of Italy, emphasizing national identity and the right of a people to self-determination. Savarkar saw striking parallels between Italy's struggle and India's, drawing inspiration from Mazzini's writings on guerrilla warfare, the importance of national consciousness, and the unwavering belief in the inevitability of freedom.
And then, of course, there's the publication that landed him in hot water, his book on the 1857 Indian Rebellion, which the British immediately banned. What made this particular work so dangerous in the eyes of the colonial authorities?
It was a direct assault on the British narrative. They had long dismissed the 1857 uprising as a chaotic mutiny, a mere blip in their otherwise glorious reign. Savarkar reframed it as a war of independence, a strategically planned and coordinated rebellion against British rule. By doing so, he challenged their authority, exposed their brutality, and inspired a new generation to see themselves as inheritors of a legacy of resistance.
we're left with this image of Savarkar in London, a young revolutionary navigating a complex web of political ideologies, clandestine meetings, and intellectual pursuits, all with a singular focus: India's liberation. What a fascinating start to this deep dive.
It's really amazing how Savarkar took those revolutionary ideas and actually put them into practice, like building a movement and trying out different strategies.
Yeah, it's like he took Mazzini's theories and applied them to the real world, trying to lead a resistance movement from so far away in London.
Thousands of miles away.
And one of his boldest moves, I think, was setting up the Free India Society, right there in London.
The Free India Society was pure genius, if you ask me.
Oh, yeah.
On the surface, it looked like any other social club for Indian students, a place to hang out and talk about books and stuff. But underneath it all,
It was a secret hub for Savarkar's network of revolutionaries.
exactly. He knew how to work in plain sight. The British probably thought those students were just discussing boring academic stuff, but Savarkar was carefully planting the seeds of rebellion.
It was like leading a double life, right? He'd hold these weekly meetings and give lectures on what seemed like harmless topics, but all along, he was subtly fueling the flames of revolution.
He was strategic like that.
Speaking of strategic, it was through the Free India Society that Savarkar started working on one of his most influential projects, a deep dive into the 1857 Indian Rebellion. And this wasn't just another history book, was it?
Not a chance. Savarkar called it the Indian War of Independence, 1857, for a reason. He wanted to reclaim the narrative, you see.
The British had always brushed it off as just a chaotic mutiny, a sign of their own strength in putting down unrest.
Exactly. But Savarkar had other ideas. He dug deep into primary sources, even British accounts, to show that the rebellion was so much more than a spontaneous outburst.
He presented it as a meticulously planned war for independence.
He brought to light the coordination, the military tactics, and above all, the burning desire for freedom that fueled the uprising.
He even challenged how people saw key figures, portraying them not as rebels, but as national heroes.
It was powerful stuff. And Savarkar didn't shy away from the possibility of armed struggle as a path to freedom, He saw the 1857 rebellion as proof of the incredible courage of those willing to fight for their freedom, even when the odds were stacked against them.
The book became a lightning rod. The British banned it in India immediately, but that just made its impact even bigger. It was as if they created this forbidden fruit that people were desperate to get their hands on.
It was like a wildfire they couldn't put out. People smuggled it in, read it in secret, passed it from person to person. Savarkar's message of resistance spread like wildfire.
And, it's incredible to think about everything he went through just to get this book published. First, he tried to find a printer in India, but no one dared to take the risk.
The fear was palpable, I imagine.
The British had created this atmosphere of fear and repression, where even printing a book that challenged their narrative was seen as a dangerous act.
It's mind-boggling when you think about it.
But Savarkar, he wasn't giving up that easily. He eventually found a printer all the way in Holland who agreed to take on the project.
Wow.
But then he had the challenge of smuggling the manuscript out of England.
I can only imagine the lengths he had to go to.
It was like something out of a spy novel.
Mhm.
The manuscript was passed from person to person, hidden in luggage, shipped through these secret channels, all to make sure it reached that printer safely.
Talk about dedication.
The whole process, from researching and writing to publishing, really shows Savarkar's character. He was incredibly thorough, resourceful, and absolutely determined to get his message out, no matter what obstacles he faced.
He truly understood the power of the written word.
He knew it could cross borders, spark action, and rewrite the story of a nation. That book on the 1857 rebellion, it wasn't just a history lesson, it was a call to action, a blueprint for resistance.
Absolutely. He was strategic, too, in realizing he had to reach a wider audience. To ignite a mass movement, he couldn't just preach to the choir, those revolutionaries and intellectuals in London.
He needed to awaken the hearts and minds of everyday Indians.
And what better way to do that than by reclaiming this pivotal moment in their history, a moment that had been twisted and buried by their oppressors.
His book gave them the tools to fight back against the British narrative.
It instilled a sense of pride in their heritage.
And it reminded them of their own power to resist. He was sowing the seeds of a revolution, one book at a time.
And the best part? It worked. Even though it was banned, countless Indians read that book. It fueled their anger, strengthened their resolve, and inspired a new generation to pick up the torch and fight for their freedom.
You can draw a straight line from that book's publication to the surge in the Indian independence movement in the years that followed. It's truly remarkable.
Absolutely. Savarkar was brilliant in that sense.
Yeah.
He knew that to dismantle an empire, you have to dismantle its myths. And that's exactly what his book did. It chipped away at the foundation of British authority
Exposed their cruelty.
and gave legitimacy to India's struggle for freedom. It's really quite something.
You know, it's incredible how Savarkar was constantly finding new and creative ways to challenge British rule. He wasn't just content with writing and giving lectures. He was exploring all sorts of avenues to spread his message and rally support.
He was a true revolutionary, always adapting his strategies to overcome any obstacle.
And one of his most daring moves was his attempt to, get this, establish a secret society within the British Indian Army.
Oh, yeah, that was a risky move. Talk about entering the lion's den.
The British Army was their stronghold in India. Infiltrating it would have been no easy feat. What was Savarkar hoping to achieve?
He understood to truly defeat the British, he needed to weaken them from the inside out.
It was a bold plan. If it had worked, it could have changed everything. How did he go about recruiting people? What were some of the challenges he ran into?
Well, Savarkar was incredibly strategic. He knew he couldn't just walk up to soldiers and be like, hey, you want to join my secret rebellion? That would have been suicide.
Yeah.
Instead, he focused on finding those individuals who were already sympathetic to the cause of Indian independence, people who resented British rule.
So he was looking for those cracks in the armor, those individuals who might be receptive to his message. But how did he even find these people? It's not like they were wearing down with the empire badges.
He relied on his network, you see, other revolutionaries and sympathizers who were already in the army. He also cleverly used his writing and speeches to subtly appeal to Indian soldiers' sense of patriotism.
It was a delicate balancing act, for sure. He had to inspire them without directly inciting a rebellion.
He couldn't risk exposing his network or putting those who joined his cause in harm's way.
Exactly. So it was a dangerous game, and unfortunately, Savarkar's efforts to create that secret society within the army didn't really pan out.
The British were no fools. They had their spies everywhere and were quick to squash any whiff of dissent.
And the consequences were brutal if you got caught. Imprisonment, torture, even execution.
The stakes were incredibly high.
But you know what's remarkable? Despite the danger, Savarkar never gave up on trying to reach those within the army who he felt could tip the scales.
He was relentless in his pursuit of freedom.
Absolutely. And, even though his plan for a secret society within the army didn't succeed, just the fact that he tried shows you how deeply he understood the power dynamics at play. He knew that real independence, true freedom, wouldn't come solely from intellectual debates or public protests.
He recognized the need for a multi-pronged approach.
One that combined political activism, intellectual awakening, and strategic maneuvering within the very institutions that propped up British rule. He was playing 3D chess while everyone else was playing checkers.
I like that analogy.
And that's what I find so fascinating about Savarkar. He was constantly trying to outmaneuver the British, using their own systems and structures against them. He was a master strategist, always thinking 10 steps ahead.
He was always looking for new angles, new ways to disrupt the status quo and move the needle closer to Indian independence.
He was absolutely relentless, never deterred by setbacks, always pushing the boundaries of what was possible. And that unwavering commitment, that's what makes his story so captivating, so inspiring.
I completely agree.
Well, as we wrap up our deep dive into Savarkar's time in London, we come away with a deep appreciation for the incredible impact he had, not just on India's fight for independence, but on how we think about revolution itself.
He was a true visionary.
He showed us that revolutions are multifaceted. They require strategic thinking, a cultural awakening, individual courage, and a deep understanding of the power of narratives and symbols.
He was a master storyteller.
There's no doubt he was a complex and controversial figure, but his story is a powerful reminder that the pursuit of freedom is a journey. It's a journey that demands constant struggle, unwavering belief, and the courage to challenge those in power.
And to never give up hope.
Absolutely. And on that note, that's your deep dive. We hope this exploration of Savarkar's early years in London has piqued your curiosity and inspired you to dig deeper into the complexities of history, revolution, and the fight for freedom. Until next time, keep exploring.